I opened the door to my wife's company's lavish party with a gift in hand, only to see my wife's rich CEO on one knee proposing to my wife. "Will you leave your poor impotent husband and marry me?" Everyone laughed. Then my wife said yes. So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, party, trip, and pulled out my 90% company share, $357 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 156 missed calls and someone showed up at my door. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and instantly know something's wrong? Like when your dog starts acting weird before an earthquake or when your mom calls you by your full name? That's exactly what hit me the second I stepped into the Grand Meridian Ballroom clutching a silver-wrapped gift box like some kind of chump. The place was dripping with money. And I mean literally dripping. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen fireworks, casting prismatic light across marble floors so polished you could probably perform surgery on them. The kind of opulent nonsense that screams we have more money than sense in 14 different languages. Everyone was dressed to the nines, which in Manhattan terms means everyone looked like they just stepped off the cover of Forbes or Vogue, depending on their tax bracket. I'd spent 3 weeks hunting down this necklace. A limited edition piece from some hotshot designer in Milan whose name I couldn't pronounce without sounding like I was clearing my throat. The kind of jewelry that costs more than most people's cars and comes with its own insurance policy. Clara had mentioned it exactly once in passing while scrolling through some fashion magazine during breakfast 6 months ago. But hey, that's what good husbands do, right? We remember the random stuff our wives say and then move heaven and earth to make it happen. The silver wrapping paper had taken me 20 minutes to get right. I'm a tech guy. I can write code that makes millions, but apparently gift wrapping is where my talents hit a brick wall. Still, it looked decent enough tied with this ridiculous ribbon that cost more per foot than most people spend on lunch. As I moved through the crowd, nodding at familiar faces and dodging air kisses from people whose names I'd forgotten, 5 seconds after meeting them, I started picking up on the vibe. There was this electric current running through the room, like everyone was in on some joke I hadn't heard yet. Conversations would stop mid-sentence when I passed, then resume in hushed, excited whispers. Classic party behavior when drama is about to go down. The laughter started before I saw anything. Not the polite champagne bubble giggling you'd expect at a charity gala, but the kind of raw, ugly laughter that makes your stomach drop. The sound people make when they're watching someone else's life implode in real time. I followed the noise toward the front of the ballroom where a small stage had been set up, probably for the evening speeches about whatever cause we were supposedly supporting this time. That's when I saw him. Alexander Pierce, 6'2", of perfectly sculpted arrogance, down on one knee like some kind of rom-com hero. Except this wasn't Netflix, and I wasn't watching from my couch with a bag of Cheetos. He had a microphone in his hand because of course he did, and his voice was carrying across the entire ballroom with crystal clarity. "Will you leave your poor impotent husband and marry me?" The words hit me like a freight train made of pure humiliation. Poor impotent. I'd made this man richer just by existing in the same tech ecosystem as him. My patents alone had probably funded his last yacht and impotent. Well, that was just factually incorrect. But apparently we were playing fast and loose with the truth tonight. The crowd was eating it up for 100 of Manhattan's finest, all unified in their collective enjoyment of my public destruction. I could see phones coming out because nothing says I was here like filming someone's marriage dissolving in high definition. Social media was about to have a field day. But the real gut punch was still coming. Clara, my wife of 7 years, the woman who'd stood in our kitchen that morning asking if I thought her dress made her look fat. The same person I'd bought a ridiculously expensive necklace for, looked down at Pierce with this smile I'd never seen before. Not the smile she gave me when I brought her coffee in bed, or the one she wore during our wedding photos. This was something else entirely, something that made my chest feel like someone had reached in and scooped out everything important. "Yes," she said clear as day, loud enough for the microphone to catch. The roar that followed was deafening. Applause, cheers, whistles, like they'd just witnessed the Super Bowl touchdown instead of the systematic destruction of my life. I stood there still holding that stupid gift box, watching my wife accept a proposal from another man while hundreds of people celebrated like it was the entertainment highlight of their year. Pierce stood up, swept Clara into some dramatic Hollywood kiss, and the crowd went absolutely wild. Someone near me actually hooped. Another person started a slow clap that quickly became thunderous applause. I felt like I was watching it all happen to someone else, like I'd accidentally walked into the wrong movie theater and couldn't find the exit. The smart play would have been to storm out, maybe throw the gift box at Pierce's perfectly styled head. Definitely cause some kind of scene that would at least give me the satisfaction of ruining their moment. That's what they were expecting. Hell, that's what they were hoping for. Nothing entertains rich people quite like watching someone else lose there in public. But here's the thing about being in tech for 15 years. You learn to play the long game. You learn that the best revenge isn't served hot. It's served methodically, systematically, And with the kind of precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep with joy. So, instead of giving them the meltdown they wanted, the dramatic confrontation they were all secretly recording on their phones, I did something that probably confused the hell out of everyone in that room. I turned around. No shouting, no scene, no thrown objects or dramatic declarations. I just pivoted on my heel like I was leaving a particularly boring board meeting and started walking toward the exit. The gift box stayed firmly in my hands because damned if I was going to leave behind a 3 salaries worth of Italian craftsmanship for these vultures to pick over. The crowd's energy shifted as I moved. You could feel the confusion rippling through the room like a wave. This wasn't the script they'd expected. Where was the rage? The tears? The public breakdown that would give them something to gossip about for months. I kept walking past the champagne fountain that probably cost more than most people's annual rent, past the ice sculptures that were already starting to melt under the heat of everyone's anticipation, past the string quartet that had stopped playing to watch the drama unfold. My footsteps echoed on the marble, steady, deliberate, completely unbothered. Behind me, I could hear Pierce trying to restart the party atmosphere. His voice booming through the microphone about love conquering all and new beginnings. Classic CEO move. When in doubt, give a speech. But even his practiced charisma couldn't quite cover the awkward energy I'd left in my wake. The doorman, different guy than usual, probably hired special for tonight, opened the massive brass doors for me with a look of professional confusion. I nodded my thanks and stepped out into the cool Manhattan night, where the city's honest chaos felt refreshingly real compared to the manufactured drama. I just escaped. My Uber was already waiting. I called it the moment I heard Pierce's voice on that microphone because I may be a lot of things, but stupid isn't one of them. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror as I settled into the back seat, probably wondering why someone was leaving such a fancy party so early, still clutching a silver gift box like it contained the secrets of the universe. Rough night? He asked, because Uber drivers in New York have apparently never met a personal boundary they couldn't cross. Getting better by the minute, I told him and meant it. As we pulled away from the Grand Meridian, I caught a glimpse of the ballroom through the massive windows. The party was back in full swing. Pierce and Clara probably already planning their future while the crowd celebrated their successful humiliation of the guy who just walked out. They thought they'd won something tonight. Poor bastards had no idea what was coming. The gift box sat in my lap, still perfectly wrapped, still unopened. Inside was a necklace that Clara would never wear, bought by a husband who apparently no longer existed. But that was fine. I had other plans for my money now. Better plans. Plans that didn't involve funding my own public humiliation or buying jewelry for women who thought poor and impotent were accurate descriptions of the man who'd built their entire lifestyle from scratch. The city lights blurred past the window as we headed uptown. And for the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Clarity. Tonight had been a gift in its own twisted way. Clara and Pierce had just handed me the justification I needed to do what I'd been too polite, too civilized, too stupidly loyal to do before. They wanted to play games with my life. Perfect. I'd been playing games since before Pierce learned how to tie his first necktie, and I'd never lost one yet. The real party was just getting started. My penthouse felt different when I walked in. Not physically, the same ridiculously expensive furniture Clara had insisted on was still there. The same pretentious art pieces that cost more than most people's houses were still hanging on the walls like silent judgments. But the energy had shifted. The place felt lighter somehow, like someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been slowly suffocating for years. I tossed the silver gift box onto the kitchen counter without ceremony, letting it land with a satisfying thud next to a bowl of fruit that probably cost $50 because everything in our scratched that my life had to be organic, artisanal, and Instagram-worthy. The necklace could stay wrapped forever for all I cared. Maybe I'd turn it into a paperweight or a very expensive reminder of my own stupidity. The marble countertops gleamed under the recessed lighting, reflecting my face back at me in a dozen different angles. I looked tired, which made sense considering I'd just watched my marriage implode in front of Manhattan's social elite. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something else. Something that looked suspiciously like relief. I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan, the good stuff. The bottle Clara always told guests was Michael's little hobby. Like collecting 25-year-old scotch was equivalent to building model trains in the basement. Tonight, it wasn't a hobby. Tonight, it was medicinal. The burn felt good going down. Honest in a way that nothing else had been for months, maybe years. I'd been lying to myself for so long about what my marriage had become that I'd forgotten what truth actually tasted like. Turns out it tastes like expensive whiskey and vindication. My office was at the far end of the penthouse, past the living room that looked like it belonged in Architectural Digest and the dining room we'd used maybe 6 times in the past year. Clara preferred eating out, being seen, she called it. Networking, she claimed, though I'd started to suspect her networking involved a lot more one-on-one meetings with certain billionaire CEOs than I'd originally thought. The office was the only room in the place that was actually mine. Clara had decorated everything else with the help of some hotshot interior designer whose name she dropped constantly, but my office was off limits. Dark wood, leather chairs, shelves lined with actual books instead of decorative spines, and most importantly, a safe built into the wall behind a painting of the Brooklyn Bridge. Because even my safe had to have some style. According to my wife, I sat down at my desk, the same one I'd bought when Clara Jin was still operating out of a cramped office space in Soho. Back when Clara was still impressed by my entrepreneurial spirit, instead of embarrassed by my lack of social connections. The wood was scarred from years of late nights, coffee rings, and the occasional moment of frustration when code refused to cooperate. Real wear, honest wear, not the fake distressing you pay extra for at overpriced furniture stores. The safe opened with a series of beeps, and I pulled out the black leather folder that had been sitting there for 3 years, untouched, but not forgotten. The label read primary assets in my own handwriting, applied with a label maker on one of those nights when I couldn't sleep, and decided to organize my life like it was a filing cabinet. Clara had laughed at me for it. Who needs paper anymore, Michael? Everything's digital now. Turns out the guy who built his company from the ground up and didn't trust the cloud with his most important documents needs paper. The guy who remembered that lawyers love paper trails and judges prefer physical evidence needs paper. The guy who saw his wife making eyes at other men at charity galas for the past 6 months needs paper. I opened the folder and spread the contents across my desk like I was dealing a very expensive hand of poker. Every document told a story, and together they told the story of how a 24-year-old kid from Queens with a computer science degree and too much ambition had built something worth $357 million. The original incorporation papers for Clarigan Technologies filed 7 years ago when I was still naive enough to think love and business mixed well. My signature, Clara's signature, and a witness signature from my college roommate who'd driven over at midnight to make it official. Clara owned 49%. I owned 51%. Seemed fair at the time. Seemed romantic. Even what wasn't in those original papers was the story of everything that came after. The patent applications I'd filed solo, working 18-hour days in a cramped office, while Clara handled business development at lunch meetings that always seemed to involve more martinis than contracts. 23 separate patents, all with my name as the primary inventor, all generating revenue that had funded our lifestyle, our penthouse, our ridiculous grocery bills. The bank statements painted an even clearer picture. The initial funding for Clara Jan had come from my savings, my student loan money, my grandmother's inheritance that she'd left specifically for me to chase my dreams. Not our dreams, my dreams. Gran had been smart enough to put that in writing. Bless her practical heart. $200,000. Every penny documented and traced directly to company operations. Then came the investment rounds. Series A, Series B, Series C, each one negotiated and closed by me while Clara handled public relations. The investors' names were all there in black and white along with the contracts that spelled out exactly who owned what. The math was simple, even if the legal language was dense. Michael Chin owned 90% of Clarigan Technologies. Clara Monroe owned 10%. Mostly as a gesture of marital goodwill that was looking pretty stupid in hindsight. I pulled out my laptop and opened the company's financial management system. The same system I designed, the same one Clara had never bothered to learn how to use. Too complicated, she'd always said that's what we pay accountants for. Except we didn't pay accountants to make executive decisions about where our money went. And the system required seal authorization for any transfer over $10,000. Guess who had been happily clicking approve on vacation packages, designer shopping sprees, and mysterious consulting fees without reading the fine print? The first stop was easy, the company travel account. Clara and Pierce had a business retreat scheduled for next week in the Caribbean. Business retreat, right? Because the best place to discuss quarterly projections is obviously a 5-star resort where the only quarterly thing anyone cares about is how many mojitos they can fit into 15 minutes of poolside networking. 2 clicks, 1 authorization code, and suddenly Alexander Pierce was going to be vacationing alone. The resort booking, the first-class flights, the mysterious spa package that cost more than most people's rent. All of it canned with the cold efficiency that only comes from truly excellent software design. Next up, the party. Tonight's little humiliation spectacular at the Grand Meridian hadn't been cheap. The ballroom rental, the catering, the flowers, the string quartet, the ice sculptures. Everything had been charged to Clarigan's corporate events account, which according to the receipts had been Clara's idea of a networking opportunity that would enhance the company's profile in the community. Well, mission accomplished, honey. The company's profile was definitely enhanced, just not in the way you were hoping. Stop payment orders are beautiful things when you know how to file them properly. Each vendor got the same automated message. Payment canceled due to unauthorized use of corporate funds. The florist, the caterer, the venue, even the photographer who'd probably captured my moment of public humiliation in high-definition glory. All of them were about to discover that networking events don't pay for themselves. But the real nuclear option was sitting right there in front of me, glowing on my laptop screen like the business equivalent of a big red button marked "Do Not Press." The operational account, $357 million, managed by executive override, requiring my personal authorization for any withdrawal over $50,000. Clara thought she was the CEO. The board thought she was the CEO. Hell, half the tech blogs in Manhattan thought she was the CEO. But being the public face of a company and actually running it are two very different things. And the difference is usually measured in who controls the money. I built multiple fail-safes into the system, partly because I'm paranoid and partly because I'd watched too many startups get destroyed by internal politics. Every major decision required two signatures, mine and Clara's. Every financial transfer needed executive authorization. Every change to company structure needed board approval. It was bulletproof, assuming both executives were operating in good faith. Turns out good faith is harder to find than I'd thought. The freeze took exactly 30 seconds to implement. One dialog box, one confirmation screen, one final click, and suddenly Claragan Technologies was operating under emergency financial protocols. No transfers, no payments, no access to operational funds without direct authorization from the primary stakeholder. That would be me, in case anyone was wondering. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails piling up like digital snow. Clara's name flashed on the screen, then Pierce's, then numbers I didn't recognize, but could probably guess. The party was probably still going strong, but somewhere in the Grand Meridian Ballroom, someone was getting very bad news about their credit cards. I turned the phone face down and poured another scotch. Outside, Manhattan glittered like a circuit board. Millions of lights representing millions of lives. Most of them more honest than the one I'd been living for the past few years. The city never slept, which was perfect because I had a feeling I'd be up for a while. The folder sat open on my desk, papers scattered like evidence in a crime scene, which in a way they were. Clara and Piss had committed the perfect crime. They'd stolen my life, my dignity, and my trust, all while making me pay for the privilege. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that being married to someone meant you own them. That signing a few papers made you equal partners regardless of who did the actual work. They'd forgotten that in business, like in code, the person who builds the system gets to decide how it runs. And I was just getting started. I woke up at dawn feeling better than I had in months, which probably says something deeply concerning about the state of my marriage. Sorry, former marriage, but I wasn't in the mood for self-analysis. The morning light streaming through my floor-to-ceiling windows felt different somehow, cleaner, like someone had finally washed away months of accumulated from the glass. My phone looked like it had survived a digital apocalypse. 47 missed calls, 83 text messages, and enough voicemails to fill a small novel about betrayal, panic, and what I could only assume was a lot of very creative swearing. Clara's name dominated the call log like a desperate ex trying to explain why she'd keyed your car. Followed by Pierce, our CFO Janet Morrison, 3 different board members, and because this nightmare couldn't get any more surreal, my mother-in-law, Donna Monroe. Calling me was like receiving a personal invitation to my own execution. That woman had never liked me, never thought I was good enough for her precious daughter, never missed an opportunity to mention how much more successful Piss was at dinner parties. The fact that she was calling now, probably to gloat about last night's public humiliation, was just the cherry on top of this whole show Sunday. I turned the phone face down and went to make coffee instead. Real coffee, not the pretentious single-origin small-batch artisanal nonsense that Clara insisted on buying from some hipster cafe in Brooklyn where they charged $15 for what was essentially hot bean water with an attitude problem. Just good old-fashioned dark roast that could wake the dead and didn't require a thesis on terroir to justify its existence. The kitchen felt enormous without Clara's morning routine cluttering it up. No yoga mat spread across the marble floors. No blender full of whatever green smoothie was trending on her Instagram feed that week. No passive-aggressive notes about whose turn it was to replace the water filter. Just me, my coffee, and the satisfying silence of a life that was finally my own. I'd spent the night doing math, which sounds boring until you realize that math, when applied correctly, can be the most devastating weapon in the world. Clara thought she destroyed me last night, but she'd actually just handed me the justification I needed to use every legal tool in my considerable arsenal. The numbers didn't lie. I own 90% of a company worth more than some small country's GDP, and I just locked down every penny of it. The best part, it was all completely legal, bulletproof. Actually, I'd learned a long time ago that the difference between revenge and justice is usually just a matter of paperwork. And I'd always been very, very good at paperwork. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Patrick from the front desk, which meant someone was downstairs trying to get up to see me. Given the current state of my social calendar, this couldn't be good news. Morning, Mr. Chun. Patrick's voice crackled through the intercom with the kind of professional concern that only comes from years of dealing with Manhattan's elite during their various personal crises. Got a young lady down here. Elena Vargas says she works for your wife. He paused, clearly searching for diplomatic language. She's pretty upset, sir. Elena, Clara's assistant, 26 years old, fresh out of Columbia with an MBA she'd probably never get to use because she'd hitched her wagon to the wrong star. Smart kid, but with terrible judgment in employers. I felt a little bad about what was probably happening to her right now. She'd gotten caught in the crossfire of a war she didn't even know was being fought. Send her up, Patrick. Thanks. I had just enough time to put on actual clothes. Apparently, greeting crying employees in pajamas sends the wrong message about professional boundaries before Elena burst through my front door like a hurricane made of panic and designer handbags. She looked exactly like someone who'd just discovered that her boss's seemingly perfect life was actually a house of cards built on quicksand. Her usually immaculate hair was escaping from its ponytail. Her makeup was smudged like she'd been crying for hours, and she was clutching a Starbucks cup with the desperate intensity of someone who'd already had way too much caffeine and was about to have more anyway. Mr. Chun, thank God you're here, she babbled, words tumbling over each other like water through a broken dam. There's been some kind of technical glitch with the company accounts and nobody can access anything. And the payroll is frozen, and the investor meeting this morning got cancelled because the conference room booking didn't go through, and Clara's Amex got declined at Starbucks. And she's completely freaking out because Piss's credit card got declined, too, and their Caribbean trip got cancelled. And Elena, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Breathe. She sucked in a lung full of air like she'd been underwater, then looked at me with the kind of desperate hope that people usually reserve for emergency room doctors or tax attorneys. Can you fix it? Clara said it was probably just a technical glitch, something with the servers maybe, and that you'd be able to sort it out in a few minutes because you built all the systems. And did Clara send you here? The question seemed to deflate her a little. Yes, sir. She said you'd want to know about the technical issues right away and that you'd probably want to get everything back online before it affected business operations. Technical issues. That was rich. Clara thought this was a bug in the system instead of a feature working exactly as designed. She'd spent so many years as the public face of Clara Jin that she'd forgotten who actually built the damn thing in the first place. Elena, I said carefully. Did you see what happened at the party last night? Her face went through about 6 different expressions in the space of 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, embarrassment, and finally a kind of sick understanding that made me feel genuinely sorry for her. She lowered her eyes and nodded, suddenly very interested in the pattern on my marble floor. I see. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a manila envelope I'd prepared while she was on her way up. Sometimes it pays to be 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. I need you to deliver this to Clara. She has 24 hours to respond. No extensions, no negotiations. No, I need more time to think about it. 24 hours. Elena took the envelope like it might explode in her hands, which considering its contents wasn't that far from the truth. What should I tell her about the accounts, about the payroll, about the meetings? Tell her the truth, I said. Tell her there are no technical glitches. Tell her the system is working exactly as designed. Tell her that sometimes when you burn bridges, you discover you're standing on the wrong side of the river. She blinked at me, clearly trying to process the metaphor while simultaneously dealing with the reality that her comfortable job had just evaporated around her like morning mist. Mr. Chun, I don't understand what's going on. I poured myself another cup of coffee and considered how to explain corporate warfare to someone who'd probably spent the last few years believing that business was just a series of lunch meetings and PowerPoint presentations. Elena was collateral damage in this whole mess. But she was also old enough to figure out which way the wind was blowing. Elena, how long have you been working for Clara? 2 years, sir. And in those 2 years, how many major business decisions have you seen her make without consulting me first? She thought about it for a moment, her face cycling through the kind of realizations that usually come with a hefty dose of uncomfortable truth. I don't think I've seen her make any major decisions without you, sir. That's because she can't. Clara Jin isn't Clara's company, Elena. It never was. She's been the spokesperson, the public face, the person who smiles for the cameras and makes small talk at charity galas. But the code, the patents, the funding, the actual business decisions that matter, that's all been me from day one. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she started connecting dots that had probably been sitting right in front of her for months. The way Clara always deferred to me on technical matters. The way she needed my signature on everything important. The way she'd panic whenever I traveled for more than a few days. So when she and Mr. Pierce Elena couldn't quite finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. When she decided to humiliate me in front of 400 people while asking another man to marry her. Yeah, that was a pretty clear signal that our business partnership was over. I sealed the envelope and handed it to her. This makes it official. Elena stood there for a moment, envelope in hand, looking like someone who'd just realized that the ground she'd been standing on was actually quicksand. What happens to the company? What happens to everyone's jobs? That depends entirely on how Clara responds to what's in that envelope. But Elena, I waited until she looked me in the eye. Whatever happens, it won't be a technical glitch. She nodded slowly, understanding finally dawning on her face like a particularly brutal sunrise. 24 hours. 24 hours. I confirmed. And Elena, when you give this to Clara, you might want to start updating your resume. Just a friendly suggestion. She tucked the envelope into her purse like she was handling radioactive material, which wasn't that far from the truth. Yes, sir. I'll deliver this right away. After she left, I stood at my window looking out at the city, coffee cup in hand, feeling the particular satisfaction that comes from watching a plan unfold exactly as designed. Somewhere across town, Clara was probably still convinced that this was all some kind of mistake, some technical problem that could be fixed with a phone call or maybe a really good IT consultant. She was about to learn the difference between being the face of a company and actually owning it. The timer had started, 24 hours and counting. After Elena left with that envelope clutched in her trembling hands like a diplomatic pouch containing nuclear launch codes, I sat down at my laptop and did what I do best. I wrote code. Except this time, instead of algorithms and user interfaces, I was coding Clara's new reality line by line, clause by clause, with the kind of mathematical precision that had made me millions and was about to unmake her entire world. The legal pad in front of me looked innocent enough. Just yellow paper and black ink. The same tools lawyers have been using to destroy lives for centuries. But what I was drafting wasn't just a contract. It was a masterpiece of strategic warfare disguised as corporate restructuring. Every sentence was a scalpel. Every paragraph a surgical strike designed to cut away the cancer that my marriage had become while leaving the healthy tissue of my company intact. I started with the nuclear option because why dance around the inevitable? Clara Monroe resigns as Chief Executive Officer of Clarigen Technologies, effective immediately upon signature of this agreement. Simple, direct, and about as subtle as a brick through a window. No graceful transition period, no face saving, stepping down to pursue other opportunities. Just a clean amputation of the infected limb. Clara had spent 7 years building her identity around being a tech CEO, even though she couldn't code her way out of a paper bag with a team of MIT graduates and an unlimited coffee budget. She loved the title, the respect it commanded at dinner parties, the way people's voices changed when she introduced herself as the head of a multi-million-dollar company. Watching her lose that was going to be almost as satisfying as watching Pierce try to explain to his investors why his newest acquisition just evaporated like morning mist. Next up, Alexander Pierce is permanently banned from any business involvement, consulting arrangements, or contractual relationships with Clarigen Technologies or any of its subsidiary companies. I took extra time crafting that one, making sure the language was airtight enough to survive any legal challenge Pierce's army of lawyers might throw at it. The man who'd humiliated me in front of Manhattan's elite was about to discover that public embarrassment was a luxury that came with a very expensive price tag. Pierce probably thought he was getting a 2-for-1 deal. Clara and her company, a ready-made empire handed to him on a silver platter along with a grateful wife who'd never asked too many questions about his business practices. Surprise, the only thing you're getting is a front row seat to watching your new fiancé's life implode in real time. The third clause was where things got personal. Michael Chin assumes the roles of Chief Executive Officer and Financial Oversight Director with unlimited veto power over any corporate expenditure exceeding $10,000. Translation: every coffee purchase, every lunch meeting, every designer handbag Clara tried to pass off as a business expense would now require my personal approval. I'd spent years watching our company credit cards get treated like some kind of magical money fountain that never ran dry. Spa treatments disguised as wellness consultations, shopping sprees labeled as market research, vacations that somehow qualified as industry networking events. All of it funded by algorithms I'd written during 18-hour coding marathons, while Clara handled the creative side of the business from various 5-star resorts. The fourth term was where the math got really interesting. Clara Monroe agrees to repay the sum of $357 million in structured installments over a period of 3 years, beginning 30 days from the date of this agreement. I'd done the calculations 3 times to make sure I had it right. Every penny she'd spent, every dollar she'd wasted, every cent that had funded her lifestyle while I built the actual business, all of itemized, categorized, and ready for collection. $357 million. The number had a beautiful symmetry to it, like a piece of mathematical poetry written in corporate legalese. It represented every late night I'd spent debugging code while she attended charity galas. Every weekend I'd worked while she got spa treatments. Every vacation I'd missed while she worked with Manhattan's social elite. The fifth clause was about truth-telling, which seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Clara Monroe will issue a public statement within 72 hours acknowledging Michael Chun as the founder, primary architect, and majority stakeholder of Claragan Technologies, including full credit for all proprietary algorithms, patent applications, and strategic business decisions made between 2018 and 2025. 7 years of taking credit for my work. 7 years of letting tech journalists write articles about her visionary leadership while I stayed in the background like some kind of corporate ghostwriter. The woman who could barely use Excel without calling it support had somehow become the face of cutting-edge artificial intelligence development. Time to set the record straight with the kind of public correction that would make Wikipedia editors weep with joy. Clause number 6 was about lifestyle adjustments. All corporate benefits previously extended to Claire Monroe are hereby terminated, including but not limited to private jet access, unlimited corporate credit cards, executive assistant services, and preferential media access arrangements. No more first-class flights to conferences where she'd give speeches about innovations she didn't understand. No more corporate cards that magically paid for everything from groceries to vacations to that ridiculous monthly flower arrangement that cost more than most people's car payments. No more Elena running around Manhattan handling the 1,000 tiny details that made Clara's life run smoothly while she took credit for everyone else's work. The seventh and final term was my personal favorite. Clara Monroe agrees to a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding all internal Claragan Technologies business practices, strategic decisions, and proprietary information for a period of 5 years from the date of this agreement. This includes, but is not limited to memoir publication, media interviews, podcast appearances, speaking engagements, and any other form of public commentary regarding her former role or relationship with the company. 5 years of silence. 5 years where she couldn't write tell-all books about her journey as a female tech entrepreneur. Couldn't give interviews to business magazines about overcoming challenges in a male-dominated industry. Couldn't turn our divorce into some kind of feminist rallying cry about corporate sexism. The woman who'd built her entire career on talking about work she didn't do was about to discover what it felt like to have nothing to say. I read through the terms one more time, checking each clause for loopholes, ambiguities, or emotional language that might give Clara's lawyers something to work with. The document was clean, professional, and utterly devastating. Exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 15 years learning that the difference between winning and losing in business was usually just a matter of reading the fine print. The beauty of it was that everything was completely legal. Harsh, maybe career-ending, definitely, but legal. Clara had signed contracts 7 years ago that gave me majority control of the company, and she'd been spending corporate money like it was her personal checking account while publicly humiliating the person who actually owned the business. Any decent lawyer would take one look at this document and advise their client to sign it immediately before I decided to get creative with the terms. I printed 7 copies, 1 for Clara, 1 for my lawyer, 1 for the company files, and 4 extras because, in my experience, important documents had a tendency to disappear at precisely the wrong moment. Each page came out of my laser printer with crisp, professional formatting that would look great in court if things went sideways. The envelope sat on my desk like a loaded weapon, which in many ways it was. Inside was the complete restructuring of Clara's life. The mathematical precision of justice served with corporate efficiency. She'd spent the last 12 hours thinking this was all some kind of technical glitch, some temporary inconvenience that could be fixed with the right phone call, or maybe a romantic gesture designed to smooth things over. Poor Clara had no idea that she wasn't dealing with a technical problem. She was dealing with a comprehensive solution to the problem of being married to someone who thought public humiliation was an acceptable form of entertainment. I sealed the envelope with the kind of satisfaction that usually came with shipping a perfect product or solving an impossible coding problem. Elena would deliver this to Clara. Clara would read it with whatever was left of her morning coffee and then the real negotiations would begin. Except there wouldn't be any negotiations. There would just be acceptance signatures and the systematic dismantling of everything she thought she'd built on the foundation of my work. The clock on my computer showed 11:47 a.m. Clara had until 11:47 a.m. tomorrow to sign these papers and begin her new life as a private citizen with a very large debt and a very small future. 24 hours and counting. Time to see if she was better at math than she'd ever been at actual business. I'd been expecting the knock since about 10 o'clock, which was roughly when Clara would have finished her 3rd bottle of wine and moved past the "this is just a misunderstanding" phase into full-blown panic mode. What I hadn't expected was for her to wait until 11:30 p.m. which showed either remarkable self-control or a desperate attempt to find some other solution before resorting to begging her soon-to-be ex-husband for mercy. The pounding on my door wasn't the polite, measured knock of someone who still had their dignity intact. This was the frantic hammering of someone who just realized that their entire life was built on quicksand and the tide was coming in fast. 3 sharp bursts, pause, 3 more bursts, pause. The rhythm of genuine desperation mixed with expensive wine and the kind of mistakes that keep you up at night for the rest of your natural life. I took my time getting to the door, partly because making Clara wait felt like a small but satisfying form of justice, and partly because I wanted to savor this moment. For 7 years, she'd held all the power in our relationship. The social connections, the public recognition, the ability to make me feel like a supporting character in my own life. Tonight, the tables had finally turned, and I was going to enjoy every second of watching her realize it. When I opened the door, Clara looked like she'd been hit by a tornado made entirely of consequences. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, escaping from whatever expensive updo she'd worn to impress Pierce's social circle. Her makeup, usually applied with the precision of a professional artist, was streaked down her cheeks in mascara rivers that told the story of several hours worth of crying. The designer dress from last night, the one she'd probably picked out specifically to look stunning while destroying my life, was wrinkled and stained with what looked like wine and tears and the general messiness of a life falling apart in real time. But it was her eyes that really told the story. Gone was the confident gleam of someone who thought she held all the cards, replaced by the wild, desperate look of someone who'd just discovered that the cards were actually owned by someone else entirely. She looked like a woman who'd spent the last 12 hours calling lawyers, accountants, and anyone else who might be able to explain how her perfect plan had turned into a perfect disaster. "Please, Michael," she whispered, and her voice was so different from the triumphant tone she'd used last night that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You can't destroy us like this." Us? That was rich. There was no us anymore. Hadn't been for months, maybe years. Last night had just made it official, given it the kind of public ceremony that Manhattan society would be talking about for decades. But Clara had apparently missed the memo about our relationship status, probably because she'd been too busy planning her future with Piss to notice that her present was built entirely on my goodwill and corporate generosity. I stepped aside and let her into the penthouse, partly because having this conversation in the hallway would give the neighbors something to gossip about for months, and partly because I wanted her to see what she was losing. This place, with its million-dollar view and ridiculous amenities, had been purchased with money I'd earned writing code while she worked at charity lunches. Every piece of furniture, every piece of art, every carefully selected detail that made this place look like it belonged in Architectural Digest. All of it funded by algorithms. She couldn't have debugged with a team of consultants and an unlimited budget. Clara stumbled into the living room like she was seeing it for the first time, which in a way she probably was. She'd lived here for 3 years, but she'd never really understood what it represented. The tangible proof that behind every successful woman was a man who'd done the actual work while she took the credit. "You can't be serious about those terms," she said, collapsing onto the Italian leather sofa that cost more than most people's annual salary. $357 million. "Michael, that's impossible. Nobody has that kind of money just lying around." I poured myself a scotch, the same bottle I'd been working on since yesterday, though it felt like a lifetime ago, and considered how to explain basic economics to someone who'd spent the last 7 years treating corporate finances like a bottomless ATM. "Clara, you spent $357 million of my money. The math isn't complicated." "Our money," she corrected automatically, then seemed to realize how pathetic that sounded given the circumstances. "The company money. It was for business expenses, networking, building relationships. I sat down across from her, far enough away to avoid any desperate physical contact, close enough to see the exact moment when reality finally penetrated whatever fantasy world she'd been living in. "Is that what we're calling your affair with Pierce now? Relationship building?" Her face crumpled like a piece of paper someone had thrown in the trash, then tried to smooth out again. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Pierce and we connected at that conference in Miami, and he made me feel important, powerful, like I was more than just your wife." "You were more than just my wife," I said, and meant it. "You were my business partner, my co-founder, the person I trusted with half my life's work." I took a sip of scotch and let that sink in. "And you threw it all away for what?" "A guy who proposed to you as a public humiliation stunt. Real romantic, Clara, real classy." She started crying again. The ugly kind of crying that happens when someone realizes they've made a mistake so enormous that there's no way to fix it. No way to take it back. No way to pretend it never happened. "I never meant for it to go that far. Piss said it would be fun, a way to make you realize how much you needed me. He said you'd fight for me, that you'd make a scene, that it would prove how much you cared. So, this was all some kind of test." I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "You destroyed our marriage in front of 400 people to see if I'd put on a show for your entertainment." "It wasn't like that," she started, but I cut her off. "It was exactly like that, Clara. You and Pierce turned my life into performance art. Except you forgot that the person you were performing for actually owned the theater. I leaned forward, making sure she could see exactly how serious I was. You erased me with my own money. You used my algorithms, my patents, my work to build a platform for your own ego. And then you used that platform to humiliate me in the most public way possible. This isn't a mistake, Clara. It's strategy, and I play strategy better than anyone you've ever met. She looked around the penthouse like she was seeing it for the last time, which she probably was. Her gaze lingered on the art, the furniture, the view of Central Park that had cost an extra $2 million just for the privilege of looking at trees from 40 stories up. All of it built on work she'd never done, funded by success she'd never earned, purchased with money that had never really been hers. The terms are unreasonable, she said finally, her voice small and defeated. Nobody could live with those restrictions. The money, the public statement, the non-disclosure agreement. You're trying to destroy my entire future. I'm not trying to destroy anything. I said, I'm just making sure that your future is based on your own work instead of mine. Novel concept, I know. She sat there for a long time, processing what that meant, understanding finally dawning on her face like a particularly brutal sunrise. Without my company, my money, my work to hide behind, Clara Monroe was just another failed entrepreneur with good connections and an expensive education. Without the corporate credit cards, an executive assistant and private jet access, she was just another ex-wife with a large debt and a limited skill set. You recorded the proposal, she said suddenly, looking up at me with something that might have been hope. That video, if it gets out, it would destroy Pierce, too. His investors, his board, they'd crucify him for the publicity. You could use it as leverage, force him to help me pay the settlement. I pulled out my phone and showed her the video I'd taken last night. Pierce on one knee, the crowd laughing, her saying yes with that smile I'd never seen before. The whole thing captured in high definition, ready to go viral with the press of a button. Then I deleted it. What are you doing? She gasped, reaching for the phone like she could somehow restore the deleted file through sheer desperation. That was your leverage. Your proof? I don't need proof. I told her, I have something better. I have ownership papers, patent filings, bank records, and 7 years worth of documentation showing exactly who built this company and who just pretended to run it. I put the phone back in my pocket. This can keep his reputation. I'm not interested in destroying him. I'm interested in making sure you understand that actions have consequences. Clara looked at me like I'd just grown a second head. You're not going to ruin Pierce after what he did to you. Pierce is a symptom, not the disease. He saw an opportunity to acquire a successful company through marriage and he took it. Smart business move actually, except he didn't do his due diligence on the ownership structure. I finished my scotch and set the glass down with finality. You're the one who betrayed 7 years of partnership for a man you barely know. You're the one who turned our marriage into a public spectacle. You're the one who spent our money like it was monopoly currency while I did the actual work of building something meaningful. She crumbled, then really and truly crumbled. Her shoulders shaking with the kind of sobs that come from deep inside, from the place where people keep their worst mistakes and their biggest regrets. I'll sign, she whispered through her tears. I'll sign your papers, but you're destroying me, Michael. You know that, right? You're destroying my entire life. No, I said, standing up to signal that this conversation was over. I'm just making sure your life reflects your actual contributions to our partnership. I walked to the door and held it open for her. You have until tomorrow at noon to sign those papers, Clara. After that, the terms get significantly worse. She walked past me like a woman going to her own execution, which in a way she was. At the door, she turned back one more time. Mascara streaked, dignity abandoned, looking for any sign that I might reconsider. That this might all be some elaborate negotiation tactic that could still be resolved with the right combination of tears and promises. This isn't you, Michael, she said. This cold, calculated revenge, it's not who you are. You're right. I told her and closed the door. It's who I've become, and frankly, I like him better than the guy who let you spend 7 years taking credit for his work. The penthouse felt different after she left. Lighter, cleaner, like someone had finally opened all the windows and let the stale air escape. I poured another scotch and stood at the window, looking out at Manhattan's glittering skyline, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The kind that comes from finally matching your actions to your principles, from stopping the pretense that being nice was more important than being honest. Clara had less than 12 hours to sign those papers. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I was genuinely curious to see what she'd choose. Friday morning hit Manhattan like a freight train made of caffeine and corporate anxiety. And I was dressed for war. Navy blue Tom Ford suit, Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's rent, and a tie that Clara had bought me for our 5th anniversary back when she still pretended to care about the details that made a marriage work. The irony of wearing her gift to her professional execution wasn't lost on me. But then again, I'd always appreciated good symbolism. The elevator ride to the 43rd floor felt longer than usual, probably because I was sharing it with 3 junior executives who kept glancing at me like I was carrying a bomb, which in a way I was. The bomb was made of legal documents and mathematical precision, but it was still going to level everything these people thought they knew about corporate hierarchy at Clarigan Technologies. The glass-walled boardroom looked like a fish tank full of very expensive, very nervous fish. 12 board members sat around a conference table that had cost more than some people's houses, each one trying to look calm while simultaneously calculating how this morning's meeting was going to affect their stock options, their reputations, and their ability to explain to their spouses why they'd backed the wrong horse in what was obviously a very complicated game of corporate chess. Janet Morrison, our CFO, was shuffling papers at the head of the table like she was dealing cards in the world's most expensive poker game. She'd been with the company for 4 years, had an MBA from Wharton, and a nervous habit of clicking her pen when she was stressed. This morning, the pin clicking sounded like a metronome counting down to an execution. Clara sat at the far end of the table, as far away from me as the room's geometry would allow. She looked like she'd spent the night in a blender set to career destruction. Pale, hollow-eyed, wearing a black dress that was probably supposed to look professional, but mostly just made her look like she was attending her own funeral, which in a corporate sense she was. The signed papers sat in a manila envelope in front of her. Every page initialed, every clause accepted, every term agreed to. With the resigned desperation of someone who'd finally realized that they'd been playing poker with someone who owned the entire casino, she'd beaten my noon deadline by exactly 17 minutes, which showed either impressive efficiency or the kind of panic that makes people sign documents without reading them twice. I walked to my seat with the deliberate pace of someone who knew that every eye in the room was calculating angles, measuring distances, trying to figure out exactly how much power had just shifted and in which direction. The soft sound of my footsteps on the marble floor was the only noise in a room full of people who'd suddenly realized that everything they thought they knew about this company was about to be rewritten. "Good morning," I said, settling into my chair with the kind of calm that comes from holding all the cards in a game where everyone else is still trying to figure out what game they're playing. "Thank you all for being here on such short notice." The board members exchanged glances like they were at a tennis match and couldn't figure out who was serving next. These were smart people, investment bankers, tech executives, former CEOs who'd built and sold companies worth more than some country's GDP. But right now, they looked like freshmen who'd walked into the wrong classroom and were too embarrassed to leave. "Before we begin," I continued, pulling out my own copy of Claire's signed agreement, "I want to make sure everyone understands exactly what we're discussing today. As of this morning, there have been some significant changes to Clarigan's executive structure." Clara looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair, maybe tunnel straight down through the floor and emerge somewhere in New Jersey where nobody knew her name or her recent history of spectacularly bad decision-making. But she was trapped in this room, trapped in this moment, trapped in the consequences of thinking that public humiliation was an acceptable form of corporate strategy. Effective immediately, I announced, my voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from actually knowing what you're talking about. "Clara Monroe has resigned from her position as Chief Executive Officer of Clarigan Technologies." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a stock price drop. Janet's pin clicking stopped mid-click, frozen in the air like a conductor's baton at the end of a symphony. 3 board members looked like they were having simultaneous heart attacks, which was probably just their portfolios flashing before their eyes. Additionally, I continued, because why stop at one bombshell when you can detonate the entire arsenal? I will be assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer as well as the newly created position of Financial Oversight Director with comprehensive veto authority over all corporate expenditures exceeding $10,000. Now the board members were really starting to sweat. Financial oversight with veto power meant that every country club membership, every corporate retreat, every consulting fee that had mysteriously found its way into various expense accounts was about to undergo the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for tax audits and criminal investigations. Furthermore, I said, watching their faces cycle through the 5 stages of corporate grief, Alexander Pierce has been permanently banned from any involvement with Clarigan Technologies, including consulting arrangements, partnership discussions, or casual visits to our coffee machine. That last part was my own addition, not technically in the legal documents, but I felt it was important to establish the scope of Pierce's banishment. The man who'd proposed to my wife as a form of public entertainment was about to discover that some theaters don't allow return engagements. Clara finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak than actual human speech. I need to make a statement." She stood up slowly like someone who'd aged about 10 years in the past 48 hours and looked around the room at faces that had once smiled at her with professional respect and were now regarding her with the kind of cautious sympathy usually reserved for traffic accidents and natural disasters. "I want to acknowledge," she began, her voice cracking like thin ice under pressure, "that Michael Chun is the founder, primary architect, and majority stakeholder of Clarigan Technologies. He developed our core algorithms, filed our patents, and made the strategic decisions that built this company into what it is today. The board members were now looking back and forth between us like they were watching a very expensive, very slow-motion car crash. This wasn't just a resignation. This was a complete confession. The corporate equivalent of pleading guilty to charges of taking credit for someone else's work while spending their money on personal luxury. I was the public face of the company, Clara continued, each word seeming to cost her something essential. But Michael was always the actual CEO. The algorithms that power our AI systems, the patents that protect our intellectual property, the business model that generates our revenue. All of that came from his work, his vision, his funding. Janet Morrison looked like someone had just explained quantum physics to her using interpretive dance. She'd been the CFO for 4 years and had apparently never bothered to check who actually owned the company she was helping to run. The other board members were doing the kind of mental calculations that happen when smart people realize they've been fundamentally wrong about something important for a very long time. I take full responsibility, Clara said, for misrepresenting my role in the company's success, and I apologize to the board, to our investors, and to Michael for any confusion my actions may have caused. She sat down abruptly like someone had cut her strings and the room fell back into the kind of silence that follows major earthquakes or stock market crashes. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. What other revelations might be coming, how much more of their understanding of reality was about to be revised. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room, picking up a marker that probably cost more than most people spend on office supplies in a year. Let me show you some numbers that might clarify the situation. The math I wrote on that board told the story of 7 years in corporate shorthand revenue generated by Michael Chin's patents $847 million. Corporate expenses authorized by Clara Monroe, $357 million. Actual business decisions made by Clara Monroe without Michael Chin's input, 0. Actual lines of code written by Clara Monroe, also 0. These numbers represent the foundation of Clarigen Technologies, I said, turning back to face a room full of people who were finally understanding what they'd been looking at for the past 4 years. Clara has been an excellent spokesperson, a talented networker, and a very effective public representative, but she has never been the CEO in any meaningful sense of that title. I walked back to my seat and pulled out the operational account access cards that I printed that morning. As of right now, I'm lifting the emergency financial freeze that's been in place since Wednesday night. All legitimate business operations will resume immediately. All frivolous expenditures will be subject to review under the new oversight protocols. The relief in the room was almost tangible. These people had spent 2 days thinking their company was having some kind of technical meltdown, watching payroll freeze and credit cards get declined while they tried to figure out what kind of crisis they were managing. Now they understood that it hadn't been a crisis at all. It had been a hostile takeover by the person who'd actually owned the company all along. Are there any questions? I asked, though my tone made it clear that this wasn't really a discussion so much as an announcement. Janet raised her hand tentatively, like a student who wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer to her own question. What happens to Clara's equity in the company? Clara retains her 10% ownership stake. I said though she'll be repaying her unauthorized expenditures according to the settlement agreement she signed this morning. Her equity will serve as collateral for that debt. Translation: Clara would still technically own part of the company, but every penny of profit from that ownership would go directly toward paying back the fortune she'd spent on corporate credit cards and executive perks. She'd be working for free for the next 3 years, assuming the company remained profitable enough to generate the kind of returns that could cover her debt. The meeting ended with the kind of subdued efficiency that follows major power shifts. Board members filed out quietly, probably heading straight to their phones to call lawyers, accountants, and anyone else who might be able to explain how they'd managed to miss such a fundamental misunderstanding about corporate structure. Clara left without making eye contact with anyone, clutching her purse like it contained the last remnants of her professional dignity. I stayed in the boardroom after everyone else left, looking out at Manhattan through the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city conduct its daily business of making and losing fortunes, building and destroying careers, creating and eliminating opportunities with the ruthless efficiency that made capitalism such an elegant system when it worked properly. The coup was complete. Clarigen Technologies now had leadership that matched its ownership structure, financial oversight that reflected its actual priorities, and a very clear understanding of who had built what and when and how. Clara's reign as fake CEO was over. My actual leadership of the company I'd built from scratch had finally begun, and it felt exactly as satisfying as I thought it would. 2 weeks after watching Clara's corporate empire crumble like a sand castle at high tide, I found myself in Brooklyn, standing outside a converted warehouse that looked like it had seen better decades. The neighborhood was all hipster coffee shops and startup dreams. The kind of place where MIT graduates when it changed the world on ramen budgets and pure caffeine. Bright Layer AI occupied the 3rd floor of a building that probably violated half the fire codes in New York, but buzzed with the kind of authentic energy that Clara's polished boardrooms had never managed to capture. No marble floors or Italian leather furniture here, just folding tables covered in laptops, white bars covered in algorithms that actually meant something, and the beautiful chaos of people building something real. Leia Chun was 26, barely 5't tall, and could debug code that would make senior engineers weep. Clara had dismissed her pitch 6 months ago with a condescending smile and some about market readiness. Translation: Clara couldn't understand the technology well enough to fake expertise about it at dinner parties. Your AI learns human emotion recognition in real time, I said, watching Leia's team work with the focused intensity that only comes from believing you're solving problems that matter. No training data, no pre-programmed responses, just pure adaptive intelligence. Leia nodded, her eyes lighting up with the kind of passion Clara had never shown for anything that couldn't be photographed for Instagram. Most AI systems are just elaborate pattern matching. We're building something that actually understands context, nuance, genuine human interaction. I pulled out my checkbook. Yes, an actual paper checkbook, because some moments deserve the weight of physical ceremony. $20 million for 40% equity and a board seat, plus whatever expertise I can provide, which after this week includes a masterclass in corporate restructuring. She stared at the check like it might disappear if she blinked. You're serious? Just like that, Clara taught me something valuable, I said, watching her team celebrate in the background as word spread through the warehouse. The difference between real innovation and expensive performance art. This is real work, Leia. This is the kind of company I should have been building all along. Standing in that warehouse, surrounded by engineers who understood that code was poetry and innovation was art, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. The kind that comes from betting on people who care more about solving problems than looking good while failing to solve them. This was what building actually felt like. Café Solstice was Clara's choice, which told me everything I needed to know about her current state of mind. She'd picked the most anonymous coffee shop in Manhattan. No celebrity sightings, no society photographers, just overpriced lattes and the kind of carefully curated anonymity that rich people pay extra for when their lives implode in public. She looked smaller somehow, sitting across from me in a corner booth that probably cost less than her usual lunch meetings. Gone were the designer power suits and the confidence that came from spending other people's money on personal luxury. Today she was wearing jeans and a sweater that actually looked like she'd bought it herself with her own credit card using money she'd actually earned. Here's your first draft, she said, sliding a piece of paper across the table like she was passing state secrets to a foreign agent. I read it and immediately wanted to set it on fire. Shared vision, mutual respect. Clara, this reads like a Hallmark card written by someone who's never heard of accountability. She flinched at the profanity, which was interesting. The woman who'd publicly humiliated me in front of Manhattan's elite was apparently sensitive about harsh language in coffee shops. This isn't about communication, I continued, pulling out my laptop. This is about credit theft. 7 years of you taking bows for work you didn't do, algorithms you couldn't debug, business decisions you didn't make. I started typing, my fingers moving with the same precision I used for code. We're going to tell the truth, Clara. The whole truth in simple English that even tech journalists can understand. An hour later, we'd crafted something that would have made any crisis management consultant reach for the hard liquor. Clara admitted she'd been the public face while I built the actual company. She credited me as founder, inventor, and majority stakeholder. She even included an apology for misrepresenting her contributions to Clarigan's success. This will destroy my reputation, she said, staring at the final draft like it was her own death warrant. Your reputation was built on lies, I told her. This just makes it honest. At 8 a.m. the next morning, the statement went live across every platform that mattered. By noon, TechCrunch was calling me the silent genius behind Clarigan's success. Forbes wanted an interview about the real story of tech's most successful partnership. Clara's phone calls went straight to voicemail. Mine wouldn't stop ringing. Finally, the world knew who had built what. 6 months later, I was living in a different world. Literally, the Upper West Side apartment was smaller, sunlit, and completely lacking in the pretentious that had defined my life with Clara. 2 bedrooms, no staff, no marble countertops that cost more than most people's cars. Just windows that actually opened, natural light that didn't require a designer's approval, and the radical concept of living within my actual means instead of someone else's Instagram expectations. Columbia University had offered me a teaching position after the Forbes interview. Apparently, brilliant reclusive tech founder was their ideal faculty brand. 3 days a week, I stood in front of graduate students who actually wanted to learn instead of just network their way to startup funding. It felt like contributing to something meaningful instead of just generating revenue for lifestyle expenses. The apartment building had a doorman named Carlos who knew everyone's names and remembered their birthdays. My neighbors were professors, artists, and people who worked real jobs for honest paychecks. No one cared that I'd built a multi-million-dollar company. They cared that I held the elevator and didn't play music too loud after 10 p.m. Bright Leia was thriving beyond even my optimistic projections. Leia's team had landed contracts with 3 major health care systems and 2 Fortune 500 companies. Real clients with real problems, not the vanity projects and celebrity endorsements that Clara had chased for years. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, handwritten on actual paper like some artifact from a more civilized era. Clara had moved to Portland, working at a non-profit that taught coding to underprivileged kids. Her apartment was small, her salary was modest, and according to her letter, she was finally learning the difference between being important and being authentic. "You tried to teach me that for years," she wrote in her careful script. "I'm sorry it took losing everything to finally understand what you meant." I folded the letter carefully and filed it away. Not forgotten, but finished. My life was moving forward now. Measured in genuine accomplishments instead of borrowed glory. The war was over and surprisingly peace felt better than victory ever had. Simple living, honest work, and the quiet satisfaction of building something real with people who actually cared about the outcome. Who knew happiness could be so uncomplicated? Walking through the Claregan office felt like visiting a museum exhibit about my former life. Gone were the champagne fountains and celebrity partnerships that Clara had insisted were essential for brand positioning. No more fake smiles from employees who'd spent years pretending my wife was a tech visionary instead of an expensive spokesperson with good connections and terrible judgment. The office buzzed with actual productivity now. Lean teams building real solutions. Engineers solving problems that mattered. Developers writing code that would still be elegant 10 years from now. No more meetings about meetings. No more brainstorming sessions that produced nothing but billable hours and catered lunch expenses. At Bright Leia, Leia had just closed a deal with Microsoft that would fund her team's research for the next 3 years. Real money for real innovation, not venture capital disguised as celebrity endorsements. Her algorithms were attracting clients who understood the difference between artificial intelligence and expensive pattern matching. My Columbia students were defending dissertation proposals that would have impressed researchers at MIT. Kids who'd learned to code because they wanted to solve problems, not because they wanted to network their way into tech celebrity. Watching them present their work reminded me why I'd started programming in the first place. The pure joy of making something elegant work perfectly. Back home, I brewed coffee in my own kitchen and looked out at Central Park through windows that opened to actual fresh air. No staff, no pretense, no performance art disguised as domestic life. Just the quiet satisfaction of living honestly, working meaningfully, and choosing my own priorities instead of funding someone else's ego. The war was over. Clara and Piers had their consequences. She was teaching kids in Portland. He was explaining to investors how his acquisition strategy had backfired so spectacularly. But my victory wasn't their punishment. My victory was freedom. Freedom to build what mattered, to choose what counted, to live without pretending that expensive was the same as valuable. I'd spent 7 years funding someone else's fantasy about what success looked like. Now I was living my own definition of what it actually felt like. Peace, purpose, the quiet triumph of finally matching your life to your values. Some victories don't need audiences. Some wins are worth more than applause.